Hello and welcome to the third episode of What About? And in this episode, it is about, let's call it very questionable piece of advice that I got when I started out with digital photography. And it is also about a confession I have to make. Do I have your full attention now? My name's Pete, I like pictures, and you can find mine, of course, on my blog, which is tvoom.tumblr.com, tvoom.tumblr.com. Let's start. What about? A couple of ways to shoot without full auto and without having to fumble around with manual settings, huh? Wouldn't that be something? Alright, let me start with my confession. I'm a pragmatist. So I do whatever works for me, no matter if it's considered to be right or good style or I don't give a flying, I don't say it. I also have to say though that I shoot full manual about 80% of the time, but not because that is what real photographers do, but simply because I believe that this is the easiest way to get what I want in photography, and I hope that over the course of these videos I will be able to prove that to you. I do get it though, that some people simply don't want to fumble around with settings, and that is a totally legit thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And especially when we're a beginning photographer, we might be simply overwhelmed by all these knobs and dials and buttons and switches and menu settings. I was when I got my first DSLR about 15 years after the last time I touched a camera, a still frame camera though. So I just wanted to take pictures. I went to a friend of mine who's a professional photographer and I said, "Give me a hint, where can I start?" And he gave me a piece of advice that sounded like solid advice back then, but it turned out to be, at least for me, questionable. He said, switch your camera to full auto and take pictures, and then look at the settings. I did. And it didn't work for me, because whether the photos turned out to be the way I wanted them or not, that was rather coincidental, and I had no control over what my camera did. Some photos were too dark, others were too bright, some had a weird color cast, and even the focus wasn't always right. So no, it didn't work for me, and looking at the settings in many cases just showed me what I don't want. So yeah, full auto, no. It's what I call the no-no mode. You don't want to use it. Because full auto, believe me one thing, is the toughest way, the hardest way to take the photos you want. And in many cases, it will even not allow you to take the photos you want. What I wished for back then was a mode either that suggests settings and then gives me in a very, let's call it intuitive way, possibilities to change them. So for example, I just want to make it a bit darker or a bit brighter, or I want to change the colors, things like that. Or a mode in which I can say, I want this or I want that, and let the camera do the rest. And well, back then I didn't know that all of these modes do exist. So you don't need full auto. And you don't need any of these scenic modes like sports, portrait, landscape, macro, which are all also just full auto modes, but with specials in it. Well, special for certain shooting scenarios, but still give you no influence over the outcome. So I will show you a couple of modes in your camera that give you at least a bit of control and are a great way to start learning how to shoot full manual. In the following, I will introduce you to 3 different auto modes. The first one allows you to control the final brightness of your photo. The second one, the aperture and therefore the depth of field. And the third one, the exposure time and therefore the motion blur. A very handy mode that is available in almost all digital cameras is the P mode, the program automatic. If you don't like the brightness of your photos, you can use exposure compensation. So, for example, tell the camera to make your photos darker than it usually would, or brighter, whatever you want to have. There's even the possibility to make bracketed exposures. What that exactly is, that is what we surely will take a closer look in one of the future videos. But that is not all. You're not stuck with auto ISO, but you can change the ISO values to your liking. You're also not stuck with auto white balance, but you can change the white balance to any of these defaults or even use a custom white balance. And you can even choose which focus field your camera uses when using the autofocus. To take even more control over exposure, it is possible to use the metering modes I was talking about in the first two videos. Depending on your camera, the program automatic will allow you a couple of other things as well. For example, in my camera, a Canon DSLR, the program automatic allows me to choose the picture style, so how the colors turn out in my photos. What the program mode doesn't do is give you any control over the depth of field, so the range of how much is in focus. But there's another mode for that. The aperture priority mode, called AV mode for aperture value with Canon cameras and A mode in Nikon cameras. With the aperture priority mode, you control the aperture and the camera does the rest. What does aperture have to do with depth of field? In short, the bigger the number, the deeper the depth of field. The smaller the number, the more shallow the depth of field, but we'll be talking about depth of field and aperture in one of the future videos. What the program automatic also doesn't allow you is to take control over motion blur. Taking control over motion blur means to be able to either freeze motion by showing no motion blur, or to show motion by showing motion blur. Canon cameras offer the TV mode, the time value mode. Nikon cameras, the S mode, the shutter priority mode, both the same. You set the exposure time. The camera does the rest. Just like with the program automatic, you have a great deal of control with time and aperture priority modes. You can use the different metering modes, you can change the white balance, the ISO, and you can use the exposure compensation. With having full control over depth of field in aperture priority mode and motion blur in time priority mode, this makes these modes to kind of the little brothers of full manual. I hope I was able to give you a bit of an overview which modes might be useful if you don't want to shoot full manual yet. And I say yet because I know you want to shoot full manual. One day you want to. So yeah, some cameras might have this mode, others might have that mode. Play around, check what your cameras have, and test them all. In the following videos, we're gonna take a closer look at all these things. Aperture priority mode, time priority mode, because I really believe that these two modes are the most handy other than full manual mode. We're also going to talk about white balance. We're going to talk about depth of field. We're going to talk about focal lengths. We're going to talk about even sensor sizes, geeky stuff, and focusing methods, all of that. But before we do all of that, we will take a closer look at how to put all of these metering methods that I was talking about in the first two videos into good use so that you can take full control over your exposures. So we will talk about the evaluative metering, the spot metering, the center weight average metering, all of that. We're going to talk about exposure compensation, all of these things. So it will be really exciting. It might sound a bit theoretical and my voice starts to break, so I have to stop now, but it is not. It is a very practical approach. And yeah, this one's for today. Bye bye. Till next time.
Oh damn, I can't believe that I missed one of Pete's videos.
Well, I guess then you didn't subscribe, did you?